Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are, yWhales. So we have a very interesting intro we're going to do today. Number one, I have Jessica Billingsley with me, and Jessica needs a massive introduction. So we're going to take some time, and then we're also going to flip that around and really dive into kind of who I am as well. And this is the start of a new series really based around the theory of Web3, the theory of what's possible, and the thought of what world would we live in truly in the next 5+ years with Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and everything above. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with grilling Miss Jessica right here. And Jessica, so let's start off. Like, what was your first exposure to the blockchain and cryptocurrencies overall?
Well, gosh, as someone who follows tech news, someone with a tech background, and I've been running technology companies since I was 22 years old, serial entrepreneur for what that's worth. I think that's what they call it. In my case, I tend to run those businesses for quite a long time. So the one that I'm currently running, I've been running for 12 years. And just staying abreast of tech news and what's going on. I mean, I first heard about Bitcoin 15 years ago, I think, when it was first emerging. And I paid attention, read a bit. To my chagrin, did not buy any Bitcoin at that time. It was kind of like when you go on and you reserve your Twitter name or your Skype name and you wait to see if that technology emerges or what we do with it. I have to say I did not do a lot with it until some few years ago. One of my developers came to me and said, my Bitcoin just hit $10 million. I'm out. And that was when I said, well, maybe I should take another look at this cryptocurrency thing and see what's going on. And to be honest, I went online, I opened up a Coinbase account, I bought a few different coins for a very low amount of money. I mean, I think I put $1,500 in total, but I logged into that a couple years ago and it was worth 20 grand. Of course, you're like, well, I wish I put a few more in back then. And really that, so in some ways, I'm relatively new to the conversion in that couple years ago was the mark where I got very serious about understanding the technology, understanding what is the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrency, which is an application of blockchain, and how that works and what the many different applications might be. That was a bit long-winded, but
no. But so now you talked about your tech background and a serial entrepreneur since you were honestly right out of college. Like, talk us through kind of the journey that got you from there, because that's an amazing one in and of itself, and I think that everyone needs to understand. Jessica's kind of a big deal. Well,
I'll try to have a little bit of self-deprecation here at some point to tone that down. Yeah. So I did a couple things. I was able to go to college early through academic scholarship. And I graduated college very early, which put me at just the right age to be at the very end of the .com boom and to get to experience that for really my first couple years of my career. So in terms of my age, I got very lucky that I had pushed through school so quickly because it enabled me to have that experience of the very end of the .com boom with a computer science degree. And I was one of 3 women in my computer science program at the University of Georgia at that time. And sadly, today, there's actually a lower percentage of women in tech than 25 years ago. So something that's a personal passion project, and of course, Web 3.0, I think, being the next frontier. So I got out of this computer science program, had my first job at the end of the .com boom, and then started my first business at 22. That was an IT services firm. We had a spectrum of offerings, and I ran that business for about 10 years prior to, in 2009, one of my existing IT clients invited me to invest in one of the first licensed cannabis operators in Colorado for what was the first licensed legal program in the world to my knowledge at that time. I did invest. I did so because I have a family member with a demyelinating illness that has very similar to MS, and cannabis had already at that time proven to be efficacious for MS. And I wanted to see study and tracking and traceability and accountability, which brings me to the business that I still run today. After investing in this operation, they asked me to pick the software to use to run this operation. And I couldn't find anything that met A, the unique supply chain and tracking requirements of cannabis, or B, what was clearly a coming need for compliance. And so we invented this concept of seed to sale tracking. I co-founded a company called MJ Freeway in early 2010, which went on to publicly list on the NASDAQ as the first cannabis technology company to list on a major U.S. exchange. We're now Akerna, and we've bought about 7 other companies along the way under our umbrella, still pursuing that mission of accountability, traceability, compliance for what you put in and on your body, starting with cannabis.
That's fabulous. And I mean, it truly an industry that wasn't exactly being accepted by our U.S. government at the time for a variety of reasons. What was that like, trying to find alternative solutions that, despite being legal in the states that you were working in, you had quite a bit of roadblocks, I'm sure.
To be honest with you, Jay, I think I was a bit naive in that, at least in the very early days. I thought, well, we're a technology company and we're not going to have the same challenges that some of our direct plant touching clients face. But that absolutely proved to be very, very naive. We had our insurance shut down. We had our credit card processing shut down. We had our banking shut down. I was not able to raise VC capital in the early years, despite showing my second year over first year was an 800% growth in a recurring SaaS business. I mean, talk about what's generally
early 2000s.
right, an early darling, right? And so actually the early years of the business were funded through true bootstrapping and some high net worth bridge loans, 12% loans that my co-founder and I signed for personally. And we were able to, with that, get the business profitable, pay back those loans. And actually, we took in our first VC funding in 2014 when 3 states legalized adult use. I think that was the point in time when someone was finally ready to take a bet on what we were doing and on its future success.
Awesome. So, but part of the reason why they asked you to identify a CRM, an ERP, EMS, whatever MJ Freeway was, is you actually you have a coding and kind of a really more in-depth tech background than you've led on so far.
Yeah, so I do have a said computer science degree and have run tech companies now for the entirety of my career. Just about, say, for my first job where I worked for someone out of school. And yes, I have not written code probably since my early 20s, but certainly understanding how all of those pieces fit together has enabled me to lead development and product teams and to really understand what is and what isn't possible in terms of technology. And I guess in some ways that brings us to our conversation today. And what I see is, and I know you see as well, is a very exciting next wave of technology, innovation, and development that I think is going to be very different from the prior to .com eras, if you will.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It is. This is really an exciting, new podcast that we're talking about, because everyone likes to talk so clearly about, the coins and the hype and what are the pumps going to be. But I rarely hear anyone talk about just the beauty of what's being orchestrated. Satoshi, whether it's a person, a place, a thing, or a team, we may or may not ever know. But there's so much that we can discuss along the lines of what was he trying to accomplish, he, she, them trying to accomplish, and how has that kind of changed over the last 10 years? then we can kind of continue to dive into just, what's theoretically possible when there's no more points of centralization, when censorship from any level, whether it's local government or just, individual, kind of isn't possible anymore. And you truly start talking about a free web. Web 3.0 is clearly a new asset class that we will explore and we will talk. And I want to go through numerous guests that can educate both you and I on what are the existing industries out there today, and how does Web3, how does blockchain technology or cryptocurrencies, what will those change? And I am just thrilled that somehow I convinced you to do this, because as someone who has been in the industry, dealt with challenges, I mean, clearly cannabis and cryptocurrencies share the complete hatred of the U.S. federal government, and completely unfounded for. Lack of education, I think, is one of the biggest issues we have right now in the space. And you've done a fabulous job through numerous articles that I've read, really talking about that, and that's why you're here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think this is a really nice segue, though, to share with our listeners some of your background that maybe not everyone has heard. So maybe if you can start out with you're an East Coast kid, right?
No, so I'm St. Louis born and bred.
St. Louis born and bred. Okay, so you moved back home after school.
I did.
You headed to the East Coast for school, right?
I did. So my background is I'm fourth generation family business. So we were a multi-state retail furniture retailer. And as most of our listeners who are in family businesses know, there's no such thing as titles. There's no such thing as work hours, and the compensation is usually pretty poor. So I started as young as, maybe 7, 8 years old, working in a warehouse, understanding really how businesses operated. I went off to, was on the sales floor, and from the time I was, 16 years old, any store I went to, I became number one salesperson, regardless of how long I was there, and just kind of was able to absorb all this from my grandfather, from my dad, and having access to anywhere I wanted inside of the business was something that, again, no one really had access to or thoughts. And this is in the mid 90s. So again, I was a little young for Web 1. I was clearly, I built my first computer at a very early age, was just enthralled with technology from the time I can remember, all the way back to, my Mac 2G or Apple 2GS and whatnot. I went away I was recruited to go play lacrosse and be a marine biologist. And after a certain point in time, I realized that I had no interest in being a marine biologist because it was not what I thought, Jacques Cousteau was supposed to be doing. And collecting water samples out on the open ocean for weeks at a time just suddenly didn't seem as interesting. So I moved back home and went back into the family business. For a brief period of time, my father and my grandfather allowed me to go open a store by myself. So learning about anything and everything needed to open a business at the age of 20. So I signed leases. I went through all the processes, procedures, hiring, staffing, technical, having to get a phone line, all these types of things. And then I decided, after my grandfather passed away, who was a big influence in my life, he started a business from nothing, with nothing. And so I said, I need to do something for myself. So I did what every completely irresponsible 21-year-old would do. And I opened nightclubs. And there was a really interesting point that I don't always share with people, but it was the most raw part of business that I've ever been involved in. It is utter chaos every single day. You're doing your best to try to control very large crowds. My largest nightclub held about 1,800 people on a Friday and about 3,000 people on a Saturday, not including concerts and everything else we did. And so what that does is it very quickly taught me how to time block, how to prioritize, and how to honestly deal with real fires. You have to analyze situations very quickly. And I found that police officers or really, really big buff dudes were not great security guards. So I hired prison guards because they were much better at controlling things. And so essentially what that quickly taught me was there is just because there's a certain protocol in place doesn't always mean it's the best. I sold those companies, went back to the family business. And when I went back, went off the sales floor and was immediately thrown into the office. And this is in the early 2000s. And we had a company that was doing over $50 million that was running on fax machines. And there was a single computer with a shared AOL dial-up account. That was the extent of the technology in this company. We, despite, again, being a relatively large company with hundreds of employees, my family just did not believe in IT. And so they left me to go figure all that out. So I took that company from fax machines and dial-up internet to e-commerce within a few years, having to do it all myself. So my earliest exposure, to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies was I remember reading the Wired article when it just came out. And I was playing a game called EVE Online. And if for any super nerds out there, like World of Warcraft and is, like nerd level. And then you get into like internet spaceships and more insanity. And so through that game, which was, again, all the super nerds of the internet, there was a conversation around Bitcoin and, how could we use it to trade our ships and whatnot. And one of the members goes, I've been mining that. And he's sold a bunch of us a block of 100 Bitcoins for $20. Helped us all set up wallets and kind of showed it to us. And to be clear, back then it was so early, I barely remember what the wallet was. It looked like a DOS-based program, but clearly had no idea about the implications. And it was just more like, hey, it's cool. We couldn't figure out how to send it efficiently. And so when I threw that computer away, maybe a year or so later, the last thing on my mind was ever, where are those coins that I couldn't figure out how to use and have no value, because I think they even had gone down in value somehow that early on. And I'm okay with that because, people are going, oh my God, is that worth this? Back then, and even shortly after, the best use case for these was drugs and kind of Silk Road and whatnot. And so I just never had much interest in it. And Satoshi's own paper, he didn't even say that this was the currency of the future. They just said this is a test protocol. So whenever people are like, oh my God, aren't you upset? My initial response is usually go find your Tamagotchi. Your Tamagotchi is now worth $10 million. If you can find it, it's, you can get $10 million for it. And the reality is, nobody could truly predict. And those that did, absolutely congratulations. And thank you for holding. Most likely they forgot their passwords until years later and then realized what it was. And the biggest reality is had I seen it hit $100 per Bitcoin, I would have sold then anyway. So it didn't matter. And this is a better story. Long story short, as I've grown and gone through, I've since, bought my family out of that company, turned around, sold it to private equity and started another number of businesses with my wife. And, throughout that entire time, as I finally had time to really think for myself, in the 2015, 2017 era, I started paying a little bit more attention to blockchain and cryptocurrencies because of smart contracts. The ability to send money back and forth and something that the U.S. government was saying was absolutely not allowed didn't give me a lot of hope. But suddenly, as someone who's struggled, and when I say struggled, like any of you that have ever used an Oracle like 8 or an old AS400 database system know exactly how frustrating it can be to get data in and out of those structures. And there's companies that the company that bought mine was still running an AS400. I know numerous companies, banks, in fact, that are on archaic 1980s technology. And there was just never anything that was worthwhile for them to make that upgrade to. So the thought of blockchain being transparent, the thought of cryptocurrencies being able to send high-speed currency around the world with no restrictions, and then couple that with smart contracts, meaning that what kind of contract you're entering into. The code is open and verifiable. That's a dynamic change, and it started giving me, as I'm again, as you can tell, a serial entrepreneur. That again, I didn't even get into all the VC work I've done over the years. It started to really become interesting, the fact that this would be the next version or some part of the next version of the web. And Web3, I don't believe has been defined yet. I think that it's still a thought. It's still there, but through all the interviews I've done, through all the conversations I've had, I do believe that the best use of Web3 has yet to be invented. I've got an Oculus behind me. The metaverse is clearly coming, and really upset with Zuckerberg for stealing the word meta. So now we're going to have to come up with another name for it, but it's going to take a minute there. And, but I know at this point, and I'm solidified that it's coming. It's no longer an if, it's just a matter of when. And the when is now. Already we're seeing this asset class grow and boom, and we watched it go to $1 trillion, we watched it go to $2 trillion, we watched it go to $3 trillion, and it recedes and goes back and forth, and it's more volatile than anything we've ever seen because it's missing all the regulation. I'm not a huge regulator. I think that things should be free and open. However, there's a number of items that should be regulated, such as just some very basic pump and dump schemes, as well as rug pulls, I think are gonna hurt the industry for a minute, as well as just unverifiable sources. So that's essentially how I got here today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And interesting. I did not. I don't think fully understand your family business journey and growing up in the family business and going and starting your own thing and going back to the family business. That's really interesting to hear. So I also grew up with parents who were entrepreneurs, actually, and so very, very much like you. I mean, I think my first real job, however we want to define that, was running payroll for the company because they could trust their preteen to teenager to run payroll more than necessarily anyone else, especially with financial safeguards that existed at that time and in place. And likewise, I was fortunate that our family was probably very forward tech adopters. My mom built an early ARPANET installation in the family office before what we know of as the internet today, which all runs on a different protocol, actually TCP/IP, which those words mean nothing other than we eventually got to a standardization. It's been at least a few decades
since I've heard ARPANET. and so if just for Mia, our probably has no idea what you just said. So for her own education for others, what was ARPANET?
So when this idea of the internet was being created, and you have to remember, and as we think about how this relates to Web 3.0, when what we know of as the internet today was in its infancy, the very first thing that existed was just a way for some computers to talk to each other without having to put that information on a physical media and go walk it over to another machine. And so this was the idea of, can we build a connection on the computer? And then how do we send that information through the cable, which at the time they were all cable of some kind connections, to another computer without having to get a physical device and go walk it over? And then how can we real-time access information on a joint server? And that grew to, is there a way to connect beyond that through some type of existing network, initially phone lines? You talked about the AOL modem. We all remember that sound. Those of us who are a certain age, of the sound of the modem connecting. It was so exciting. You were going to get to play your computer game against not just the people in your house, but some other people somewhere. So the ARPANET was just a very early way of these computers talking to each other. And the protocol that eventually became standardized was one that was created by a group of Stanford grad students, professors, Stanford faculty, and that became known as the TCP/IP protocol, which is actually today still what all internet, broadband, Wi-Fi.
HTTP:// is exactly what was the precursor. And I heard that the gentleman who invented that was very upset about the colon being in there. He regrets that. But the reason I wanted to push on the ARPANET story is because it's very symbolic of where we are today. You have if you think about then, computers were still a very new thing. And the thought that they could talk to each other was really kind of far out. And there was no real use case for them other than you might need to move a file back and forth. But the idea behind what that could become was just a far-fetched, concept. And the thought that you could just do it was really something done by hobbyists. Today, we have a very different landscape. Computers are everywhere. Cell phones are everywhere. It is clearly a standardized piece of technology of which they're all connected or easily connectable to the internet at some point. But we have these blockchains, and we have various level ones from Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, you name it, and then you have side chains, and then we have now roll-ups and all these this weird ecosystem of people just saying, how do I solve this problem? How do I move this data from point A to point B, and then sometimes it needs to go through a smart contract or various routing platforms, and there's no real consensus on the right way to make this happen. And so everything that I've done, and I've been blessed to spend close to a year now interviewing some of the smartest people in the industry, in a setting like this, and everyone just says we have no idea who the winner is. That it is so early in the race, and the technology is so young that it's not very different from where we were with you can connect from this computer to this computer, and the chains just don't talk. There is no Google of the blockchain. There is no unified anything at this point.
I feel like this is a bit of a history lesson, but maybe it's valuable. If we think about when the World Wide Web was invented, it came after the internet by quite a while, by a number of years. There was already the concept of the internet. At Georgia Tech, I could register for my classes online in 1994. That's a long time ago to be able to do that. We had chat rooms, we had the ability to talk to people and do things online, but the concept of the World Wide Web, www, was invented really shortly after that. And initially, the use case for that was not clear. The use case for that was thought that, it's just a way for some companies to advertise, and who's going to create all this content. And what I think was the biggest surprise that truly nobody foresaw, and no writers at the time wrote about, was that content was created by the users. Yeah. I think that's what's so fascinating. And this is the age of the super empowered individual, right? As Thomas Friedman would say, that we are coming off the heels of the World Wide Web and the internet and looking at this new technology. And we have this different lens now of the fact that it can be the users that create the value. And how does that work? And how does that get applied to Web 3.0? Are the users creating value because most of the world is living somewhere where you may trust digital tools more than your government to verify a smart contract? Potentially. What are the other applications of that? Bringing up the word government is a favorite topic of mine. For centuries, millennia, it's been, currency has been a very centralized currency by default. You have to have, whether it was, an estate minting their own gold or whatever it was, you had to have someone verify that currency, be responsible for that currency. But it involves something that I generally don't like when I talk about money, and that's trust. Trust to me is fabulous if we're talking about playing a game, or I trust that someone's going to cook my food correctly. When we're talking about money, we're talking about the reason that we go to work every day. We talk about the investments we make. There needs to be a little bit more than trust. And, right now I across governments around the world, and I'm not just picking on ours, that's really what the basis of it is. There's debt, there's balance, and there's people with degrees that, can fill a phone book, promising us these things are okay. But at the end of the day, the system of which that I am required to utilize those funds is slow and clunky and really doesn't serve me as much good as it used to when I was younger.
And so looking at even just the very basics abilities of cryptocurrency, being able to send a store of value, from peer to peer, without having to acknowledge the SWIFT system. And I also want to be very clear as we have these conversations, pay your taxes. Taxes are part of life. That's part of your thing. Disclose what you're doing. I don't encourage anyone at any time ever to use cryptocurrencies, DeFi protocols, or anything to in any way, shape, or form, get away from those responsibilities. You're living in the system you are in. You're using those benefits. If you choose to go outside of their financial system, I have no issue with that at all. And in fact, I think it should be encouraged. Because even at today's standards in schools around the country and around the globe, there's really a very basic, if not poor, education on what is currency and how is that even calculated.
Whew, isn't that the truth in terms of what is currency, how is it calculated, and who do you trust to administer it? And in some ways, our existing currency system and talking about government, I mean, there are some very good things government does, but if we think about where did that trust come from originally and how did that evolve? I mean, it came from the feudal system where all of the serfs trusted the Lord to tax us and to provide basically okay living conditions and to protect us if the invaders came to try to kill us or take their lands. And that has grown and grown into something of the government that we have today. And there's a tremendous value in us as humans being able to pool resources and to provide back resources into infrastructure, education, et cetera. And that works rather well in a fairly small section of the world, realistically. There's a much, much larger portion of the world and portion of our population that something is to be desired in those services, in that access. And when you're then depending on that body to provide the trust for a currency that you're going to use, herein somewhat lies the rise and what we're seeing today in the US with the rise of the tech giants in many ways being more powerful than the government. And we're seeing that play out. We're seeing that play out with policy right now, I believe, in fiscal policy, in addition to some other things. And what we're seeing and what I think we're seeing when we look at the broader world, and I talked about this in one of my articles, is the truth is more than 2/3 of the world has an average age of 35 or less. And those folks, that average age and where they live, with a much lower portion of the world living in a place of high trust with the government, they're much more likely to trust a very large peer-reviewed digital system, which is really what Web 3.0 is. That it's that concept of peer review in addition to blockchain, right?
And I think that it's worth pointing out at this point right now, this isn't the first, cryptocurrencies and blockchain is not the first attempt at creating an alternate form of currency. There's been many attempts overall, and including just recently by our favorite company we brought up earlier, which is Facebook, Meta, or whatever they're going to call themselves. They made a very valid attempt to create their own internal currency, of which I believe the U.S. government pressured them very quickly to shut it down, as it was outside of their realms for them to be the gatekeeper, because that was a closed system. That was a centralized currency created and monitored and administrated by a private company. And, clearly they have not given up on that entirely. But the good thing is that there's already enough momentum in current cryptocurrencies. I mean, there's thousands of them today, some good, some bad, and some just some funny memes that I for the life of me, if you want to own those, that's great. And I've made plenty of money, playing around with those. But it's the first time that we've ever seen the hybrid of technology with the open source ledger allowing us to clearly say and point to, I trust this. And if you don't, that's entirely fine. No one is being forced at any point in time so far to use cryptocurrencies. It's a very optional source. But to date, over $3 trillion have been invested at certain points into that system, probably more, depending on how you actually calculate it. And that leads us to really where we're heading next, which is, what does the world look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? The technology won't ever go away. It can't be governed. It can't be stopped. It can't be legislated away. You can tax the what out of it, and that's fine. We see certain states like New York being left behind. We see the entire continent of the United States being left behind right now because of some really archaic laws and a misunderstanding of what blockchain is and what it isn't. And maybe a little bit of that is driven by fear. If you have full control over a financial system and you're able to just magically generate trillions of dollars at your own, behest, it becomes a very scary thing when suddenly they're like, no, we know how many are here. We all agreed when we bought into the system that this was the number of coins that we're going to be. We agreed on an inflationary or deflationary currency of X percent. And, it becomes really the currency of the people. And, it sounds very, freedom, very much like a rally cry. But isn't that what it was always supposed to be?
Sure. And I think maybe it's important to just to level set some foundational pieces, right? So most people, I think probably who are listening have some idea of the concept of the blockchain, that this is a chain of information and it can't be changed, and another item is added to it, and that can't be changed, and another item is added. And I think maybe what's missed sometimes, especially in articles that I've read, is the peer-reviewed piece of that. So yes, it's a chain of information, and without the added factor of some number of peers reviewing and saying, yes, we agree this is the correct chain that has been added, and yes, this chain meets all the rules to be added, without that peer review, it's just an Access database. It's just a table in Excel. Yep. It's not anything special that most people who are listening haven't used or haven't heard of. It's that peer reviewed piece that makes it, that adds that trust factor. And then what is the level of peer review that is happening, and then your level of trust and what is happening with the piece of technology or with the smart contract or with the currency.
No, and it brings up a really good point, because we're coming back to that word trust. But it's trust and verify. If you go to the extent that you say, I want to verify the Federal Reserve, I want to audit the Federal Reserve and everything that's there, that's not an option. You're not allowed as an American citizen or even any public or private company to be able to do so. But on the blockchain, you can choose to do so. And that is the crux of why so many businesses that have been excluded from the current monetary system, like marijuana, and like so many other, perfectly legitimate businesses, and people are choosing to use it because they can verify. They can send it very cheaply. They can utilize it as needed. And it really says a lot, again, about where it's going, because we are so early. When we're comparing, and I love this comparison of, current state of Web3 to almost really a fraction above ARPANET, for Web 1. They exist, you can do it, but you're really being required to stay on chain. And if you decide you want to leave your computer system, you want to go to another one, you're now going through wormholes, you're going through a variety of sources to get there, because the information doesn't flow like TCP/IP. But it will, and we know it will. The thought that there's going to be one chain that rules tomorrow, I just don't believe is ever going to be relevant, because there's too many use cases. There's too many amazing ideas that are being implemented on a daily basis.
And that's really where we lead into our conversation, or what are those use cases? What are those ideas? What are the businesses that can fundamentally receive more value by implementing some of these solutions than the solutions cost? I mean, at the end of the day, any good business, A, markets their product better than anyone else, and B, innovates and solves their clients or their constituents' problems better than anyone else. And to do that cost effectively, that's how you have a business. That's how you have what we call in Web 3.0 a project. So when we think about the future and the future of Web 3.0, it's interesting because you come from some very entrenched legacy industries and have implemented the tech for those. And I would say in some ways, I'm a little bit your opposite in that every industry in which I've been involved has very much been pushing the envelope, has been an emerging technology, an emerging industry, solving new things potentially. And so I think those are two very interesting and different perspectives to bring to the table. What are the industries that you think are more likely to adopt new technology sooner?
I think that there's going to be, number one, it's going to touch everybody. It's whether you realize you're using blockchain or not, it'll become very indifferent. And I think the next phase that we're going to see is you're going to continue to see Web 3 grow up. You're going to continue to see Web 2 grow up. And we're going to start seeing a little bit of a merge and a hash in between, where essentially right now I feel very strongly that Web 2.5 is what's on the horizon. Pure Web 3 companies, 100% on chain. It's still a little early and expensive to do so. So Web 2 is again, while it has its faults and more centralized than it ever should be, it's fast, it's cheap, and it's deployable, extremely quick. Web 3 and most chains there's a lack of coders, there's a lack of education around what it is and isn't, as well as really the use case. I think MetaMask serves a purpose, but it's not going to ever be something that my parents would ever use. And so there's a number of problems that are going to have to be solved before we ever get to that point. And to me, I will say that cryptocurrencies have arrived when it shows up on a bank statement. And there's a bunch of people out there going, whoa, I don't ever want to use a bank again. And that's great. That's fabulous. Cryptocurrencies will have arrived when your bank simply allows it to be shown on your statements. As with any other investment, as with any other currency, right there on par. And I don't know when that is. I don't know what that's going to take. But I think that says a lot when, judges, lawyers, and really the financial institution overall starts to recognize that they've held on to the SWIFT system a little too long. They've held on to these old databases and centralized exchanges a little too long. And it's an evolution. It's not going to be, I don't believe, a dropping of the hammer into the gears and everything exploding and this is where it is. I remember my parents when I said, hey, would you like a smartphone? They go, no, my flip phone is perfectly fine. And now today you can never take that away from them. They have their iPhones and they're thrilled with them. And the biggest challenge I have is getting rid of the ones with the button and going to the buttonless iPhones. But that's okay. Because again, people are going to move at their own pace and what we deal with in yWhales and what the challenges that you deal with in your companies, we're more bleeding edge. We're trying to understand the technology as it's needed because there's a gap that has to be filled. And without trailblazing, we're really left to who would solve these problems. And I really talk a lot about the centralization of Web 2 and the fact that very few people have control over vast amounts of data, vast amounts of access to that data, as well as, if the data is allowed to stay or be hosted on these platforms. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that excites me about the blockchain is if you're not interested in something, that's entirely fine. You can absolutely filter it out, but that doesn't mean you can suppress it.
Fair point. And, as CEO and chairman of Akerna, a publicly traded company, we have relationships with most of the major investment banks. And fun fact, today I got an email from Goldman Sachs about a big webinar they're holding to talk about stablecoins. So it may be coming sooner than you think in terms of bank adoption. I think there's some real attention being paid now to cryptocurrency in general from the banking institutions and looking at this as a large value creation area in which they don't want to miss out. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that as it progresses. And maybe one other thing that really made me think about was when I look at how you market technology, how you market in particular software technology, there's a pretty generally understood way of going about that is related to who are your early adopters, who are your mid-market, who's the mid-market consumer base. And we break it up into 25, 50%, 25% as being somewhat the tech laggards to your parents not moving off of their flip phone. Although I don't know about you, my mom really likes those emojis. My dad hasn't quite figured that out yet, but my mom is all about those emojis. So as we think about that, so we're going to see some early adopters then for crypto, and you think it takes the banks to make it mainstream. Who are our early adopters? What are the earliest industries where we might see this actually? And I'll tell you, people ask me all the time, because cannabis is an emerging industry. Hey, are we going to see cannabis adopt this first? And I believe cannabis will adopt some blockchain applications. In particular, there's some really interesting things, and my company's working on some things in the blockchain arena, cryptocurrency and payment with cryptocurrency, and that might be a little bit farther out. If you have to consider, if you're a cannabis company and you've got your own regulatory battle to fight, you don't want to be associated with another word that is also having regulatory challenges, if you will.
I to that point, I think that we've already seen the early adopters in mainstream. And I think that, Coinbase and all the cryptocurrency and the ability for people to express themselves through currency is something that we've never really seen before. The fact that people can choose that they want one dog meme coin over another, to say this is who I am, and I agree with my money, my U.S. currency or whatever currency that they have in their bank account is less valuable than this dog meme that somebody created over here. It most likely is a joke, or maybe they were serious. I don't know. And to me, that says a lot. And you can send it. I think most people aren't sending them and using them as currency. They buy them on an exchange. They wait for it to go up or down, and then they either make money or lose money on it. But they're trying to express themselves and figure out this new phase. What's next, and I believe is coming for the industries is the NFT smart contract wave. And with that comes reliability, repeatability, and I'm not talking about arts. I think that everyone, they hear NFT and they think art, and they're very confused because they don't understand. NFTs have the ability to be essentially the front end or the forward-facing visual effect of a very complex system of essentially a mini computer program that can exist out on the blockchain forever. And right now, people still are trying to understand what that means. What does it mean to put out a smart contract? Well, in most cases, when you put it out there, it exists forever, and those deal terms can never be changed. So if you're saying that you want to enter into a DeFi protocol, you know exactly what the terms are. You can set your metrics, and once those are set, they're there until either it's canceled, or it expires, or it may never expire. Your money may be locked up, and so it becomes. Really, I think that we're going to start to see a number of technologies wanting to embrace this, wanting to see what it works for. And that's really what the series is going to bounce us into is in each industry, whether it's from logistics to oil production, to airlines, to tickets, to, whatever it is, we want to bring on the experts in those industries and really talk about the challenges that they have technology wise. In the logistics industry, it's time is money. And fractions of a cents can mean the difference of making or losing profits. And across the board, I think we really want to understand where things are going in the long term. There's a lot of talk about what's happening today, and what's going to happen a week from now. And so we really want to focus on what does it look like when you go really far out? What does it look like when every legal decision is backed up by a smart contract, meaning the judge has now certified your smart contract as this is the way this payment structure is going to go, or your company and the metrics of which your payroll are going through a smart contract. What does that look like? And today we don't know. It could come to fruition, but the reality is Web3 is here, and it's going to do nothing but continue to grow and mature. And anyone that wants to ignore it, they're always welcome to. They're always welcome, because the one thing that my favorite saying is Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin doesn't care if you believe in it. It doesn't care if you like it. It doesn't care if you are angry at it. It will continue to exist until the very last server on Earth is finally shut down or no longer useful.
Well, here's one real world example of the smart contract that I think would matter to almost any business that engages in a referral or partnership type agreement. So we have this on a very regular basis, where we have over 80 integrated partners to our core Akerna network and technology. And we are often asked by our clients to refer our preferred tech providers for other pieces of their functionality that maybe we don't offer natively. And of all of these integration referral partners, of the 80, we have maybe a dozen where we have some type of financial referral arrangement. And sometimes I wonder why we bother with that, because collecting on those referral fees, actually getting paid for those referrals is a much bigger lift than making the referral. And even though that's where the business came from, that business has to then track it, choose to pay you out. And they may not even be doing it maliciously. Somebody took the sale, they forgot to record you as the referral partner. The simple application of there's one smart contract in place, you're attached to it every time they get paid. The referring company would be sent their referral fee. I mean, that's just one extremely small use case, but an example of something that I would implement yesterday if it existed in a very easy, very meaningful way, easy way to implement that our partners would also accept and adopt. And to that point, you mentioned another new word that I don't think we've defined yet, which are NFTs, and talked about the potential, what we see today in terms of art and brands that are issuing all of these NFTs and digital representations of their brand. And at least personally, I'm going to go ahead and make a future prediction here. I think that today, NFTs are kind of something these marketing departments are doing, and maybe they're not linked up with their delivery departments. But I think what we're going to see in the nearer future is a link between the digital NFT that's being issued by these companies and an actual physical product. So take Nike, right? Nike, you can go get some gorgeous gold Air Jordans and an NFT today to show off in your mobile phone wallet, but you don't have those sitting on your shelf to wear around town. And shouldn't you really get both if you're going to get that? So just a thought process there, and a link that I think we're going to see more and more things linking that marketing piece and that digital representation to the physical world as well.
And it takes away again a little bit of that trust. It goes to a verifiable, when you go into a store, you're trusting that store has that brand. You're trusting that online retailer has this is a verifiable source. On chain, you can verify that. You can see the contract. You can see who issued it and verify if that really is Nike, Adidas, or some random brand that they just made up. And so I completely agree with you. And that's really, again, what we want to focus on with this series. And this is not going to be a rapid fire. There's not going to be multiple recordings of this per week. This is going to be a monthly series, because we need to take the time to really prep and engage and understand each industry and each expert that we bring in, to think about what is it not over the next 18 to 24 months, but looking at the next 5 to 10 years out. What is the theory behind Web3? What is the technologies that we believe is going to be most prevalent? And again, we're talking about cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies, smart contracts, the metaverse, whatever that is or will be accustomed to, augmented reality, and so many more. And so, Jessica, I'm thrilled to have you on this journey, because it's a long form, documentary of how we got here and where do we think we're going? And so the really great thing about this is we'll get to look back in years and say all the things that we were wrong on. And if we're lucky, we may get right on one or two things. And I think that is really very courageous of us to do in a time when people don't like to put their name on theories or thoughts. And, we're going to get things wrong and we're going to get things right. But what are basically using the best resources that we have on hand, I would like to educate the leaders of today so that they can prepare themselves for the future of tomorrow.
I think you put that so well, Jay. And when you're talking about the long game, neither of us are ever going to be able to tell you which dog meme coin is going to be the next hit. But hopefully, if we do our jobs well and all courage certainly included, we hope to have a hit rate like that of a VC. That one or two of our long-term predictions really comes to bear, and 1 or 2 out of 10. If we have that kind of success rate, and this grows at the rate that you and I both think Web 3.0 can grow and will evolve, the value creation of that and the investment opportunities that we may uncover should pay more than pay the investment in time.
So I'll make my first prediction, and that is Bitcoin will definitely be around in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's the easiest one that I can throw out.
That's a good one. Let's see. I'm going to make a prediction because I alluded to it earlier that we will see NFTs linked more to the physical world in the next few years.
I completely agree. And it's, there is so much coming that I'm just excited to be able to explore this. I'm excited to be able to have the access we do to the top 1% around the globe, industry leaders that can educate us as well as we can educate them on the directions they should be looking at, the thoughts they should have around Web3 and Web3 strategies. So with that, I want to thank our audience for this first session. I want to thank Jessica extremely for the courage to come on and start doing this. And I very, very much look forward to the continuing of the series.